All right, medical student from Canada. I'm just starting randomly. If I remember correctly, okay, so they're referring to something I wrote. Oh yeah, the effect of stimulants on overall performance of games. How Adderall impacts gaming performance. I read that many gamers use drugs in competitive tournaments. Yeah, it's really interesting. And okay, so I'm just gonna, yeah, like I said, I'm gonna address these questions. So med student from Canada. If I do remember correctly, I asked a couple of pediatricians about this since they deal with ADHD cases and learning disorders. Prescription amphetamines don't have a significant effect versus placebo, concentration, memory, etc. Increases self-perception of performance. Yeah, I've actually heard the same thing. I remember physicians when I was clinically training would describe, especially pediatric physicians. And at the time, I remember when I was training, I wasn't quite sure what that. It seemed I wasn't sure what that meant, but later in when I did my PhD, I actually did studies on ADHD kids in the 10 to 12 age range using sort of engineered video games. We were trying to sort of remediate or help their ability to focus with these video games. And there's a task you use to assess their attention ability called the TOVA. And it's got three components, and it doesn't. The details probably are a little dense and don't really matter, but basically it's very messy, and I can understand why physicians basically walk away with this sense of it. After, there's hundreds or thousands of research articles, and they all kind of say conflicting things because every time you get a different group of 40 people and you study them, you get significant effects on one thing but not the other, and vice versa. So there's just a lot of individual variation in this stuff, and ultimately those tests aren't. They haven't been great for population research, but they are used in the clinic sometimes to see, say, what kind of ADHD you have. So, like for instance, there's I'm gonna blank. It's impulsive. There's impulsive, and then there's like a non-intentive. Like you kind of space out, and those are two different ways they've abstracted it, and then there's a third category, so you have some combination of those two. So yeah, so they basically are looking at these reaction time tests in clinic to see, are you just getting more antsy and wired on these drugs, or are you kind of like zoning out and spacing out, and is this helping you like do that less? This gets in a really like more complicated question. I really should turn off. Yeah, so I guess some people have the problem of, okay, so with this is more, this is to make it more applicable to people maybe who don't have an official ADHD diagnosis. There is there is two categories of, you could think of it, there's two things that attention does for you. One is it's inhibitory, that, so if you're like if you're in a video game, you want to be really antsy and trigger happy, but you don't want to basically be pushing the trigger button every time anything on your screen changes. So what's happening is your entire circuitry, your motor circuitry is wired up almost as a reflex to fire. And your attention at that point, your sort of prefrontal cortex is intervening as an inhibitory mechanism to stop. And it's trying to act as a stop gate and then let you go if it, say as like an enemy on a first player shooter or whatever. Like I have this problem sometimes when I'm paying with a credit card machine, and the message changes, and it's like, I think it says pull your credit card out, and I'm just waiting for it to change, and as soon as it changes, I pull my credit card, and then it's just another message saying, like, leave your card in, and then, and so it kind of gets me to, that's an impulsivity problem, because I'm like ready to go and I pulled the trigger too soon. So it's not necessarily a problem. It's just a different mode of how your brain can work, and so it lets you be faster, which is good. Say in a first player shooter game, or if you're like a mixed martial artist or something, you're chambering a sequence of events you want to do, and in this case, you're saying like if there's a significant change in your visual range for a first player shooter, you're going to click your finger down and shoot your weapon or whatever. Um, and so now you're relying on your prefrontal cortex to basically have a stop gate until the conditions are right. So that's inhibitory control, which is something that you can measure in a very simple but kind of painful cognitive task where you just get flashed a lot of different stimuli and people uh, um, I don't know if I'm getting way too technical here. Anyway, there's two categories of attention. Let me keep this simple. Um, there's the ability to inhibit, and then there's the ability to say focus to not. So like if you kind of like are a daydreamer, you space out and you totally miss what other people are saying. That's like another category of ADHD, and it's another category of just general attention, even with healthy humans. It's another function of attention. And that's sort of like a meta attention, which is like you're scanning all your senses and your environment and it's deciding where your attention should be. So it's a meta attention. And I think some of the questions I got would be better understood if people understood the concept of meta attention. I don't know. Maybe we'll get into more later. I shouldn't drill on this too deep. I'm gonna fight my my badly trained academic um, habits, you know, uh, in PhD land, they sort of really encourage you to ramble. So I'm going to try not to do that. I'm going to try to keep this focused. I'm going to keep going through questions, and hopefully, by covering the same things over and over, maybe we'll get there. But if somebody really wants me to go deep on something, I can do that too.